What's going on, Nikki Carter?
It's about that time, baby, baby. Oh, yeah. Here we go. Here we go.
The Sinclair Show is on.
And it's on.
Run into your friends, come on.
Come on, come on.
It's a moment of the show tonight. Mailbag is tight. Sinclair is on tonight.
Once again, it's on. You're still trouble in your home. Got you tripping, don't know right from wrong. Then you let us in the show so we can talk you through. Get the answers to your questions because we speak that truth. Sometimes you doubt yourself, lost your health. Faith is on the fence, but you believe that Jesus knows your wealth. Keep it moving, spirit flowing because we're here to provide someone to lean on when you're falling. Wednesday, 8 and 9, and it's on.
Once again, it's on. You're listening to the only morning show at the nighttime hour, people. That's right. It is the Sinclair Show coming to you live. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you all who continue to send your mailbag question, comments, what you've seen on the TV, whatever it is you want to talk about, because without you all, there'd be no reason for me. Matter of fact, without you all, I could be getting me some rest right now. But instead, the most important thing is you. And so first, I want to thank y'all for that. I want to ask that you continue to send your mailbag questions in to sinclairtalk@outlook.com. I'm going to continue to address as many as possible each night that I'm on the air so I can reach you, the valued listener. That's right. That's what's up. That's what's up. Man, people, we got some real things to talk about tonight. I might get to a little softer topic, but something happened, and it has required that I provide a tad bit of attention to a tough subject matter, if you will. But before I begin, let me see who was out here first tonight. Man, let me tell y'all, the arch nemesis herself, Nikki Carter, was first on the scene tonight. Now, I don't know if it was because of the topic, because she ain't had nothing else to do, whatever. But Nikki Carter, I want to thank you for being the first person on the show tonight. That really means a lot. It means there's at least one time you done stepped your game up. I see Big Rod is out there. What's going on, Big Rod? Glad to see you in the show. Jay Dizzle, what's up with the Johnny Dizzles? Oh, y'all, they go. Your boy, Mini Mims. Mini Mims is on the show. That means somebody's food in their office refrigerator is safe. Because if y'all recall, Mini Mims had told y'all, if you bring some lunch and he didn't bring no lunch, that means he still got lunch because you brought for two people. You just didn't know it. That right there. But look, people, before we begin, let me start by saying, how many of you good people out there in listening land had an opportunity to watch the debate between Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump? I just want to let y'all know something. Now, those of you who've been on the show for years, these last 7-8 years with me, y'all know I'm an independent. So that means I got an opportunity to voice my, I might add, personal opinion. Y'all girl is in the house. Gwendolyn Lady Elegance Pritchard. She says she's sending you shouts out from where? Huntsville, Alabama. You better get in where you can fit in, because Huntsville be doing it big. That right there. So I'm just going to say this. Even though I'm an independent, meaning I vote my conscience, regardless of the political party, whoever I believe to be the best candidate, that's who I could cast my vote for. And I'm going to be honest with you all and transparent out here in listening land. I too was a little concerned at the beginning of the thing that occurred when Joe Biden said, I'm stepping down, because he was unable to pursue the rigorous nature of the presidency once again. Cassandra Key, what's going on? Glad to see you. And so I was a little bit, what's the word I want to use? I was a little bit concerned because I've not been a Kamala Harris fan in the past. There are some things on her record that I've not been as favorable toward, if you will, for my own personal and political perspective. But I also saw old Donald Trump on the other side. And if you show me who you are, I'm forced to believe you. So I, like many of you out there, were potentially thinking this is the worst. James Key, what's going on? This is the worst political season in some time, because for me, and I'm just speaking for me, you had two candidates that I was just not thrilled about, okay? But I'm going to tell you what happened as I watched a little of the debate. It became clear to me that some of you on the Republican side who felt like that Joe Biden was simply too old, and I'm going to say it because it's my responsibility to give you the straight up. I don't want to have to find the correct word. Some people on the Republican side were saying that Joe Biden was too old. His memory had left him, that he was having too many of these escapades, if you will, where we didn't know where he was going with something. And I noticed that some of you on the Democratic side was saying, leave Joe alone, whatever. But when Joe stepped up and said, hey, I'm going to bow out, because he had that little incident where he didn't even know where he was. He was just talking about stuff like he was on the front porch. Everyone had to agree that it was probably the best. Detective Pamela Black, what's going on? Glad to see you. And so when I say this, I wasn't thrilled about Kamala. I certainly wasn't thrilled about Donald Trump. You know, it's this thing about if you've been convicted of 34 felony counts that, you know, I've got a problem. I wouldn't want him. It didn't matter what the nature of his political affiliation was. But I watched this debate, and Republicans, I've got to give you credit. I'm going to give you credit because when you said that Joe was too old and he looked like he was aging before us when he got on that stage the last time before he stepped away, when we were giving you resistance, some of it was people just didn't want to see it because they didn't want it to be Donald Trump, you know, winning whatever you say. Nikki Carter said he shouldn't be on this stage. Right. And let me tell you what I saw last night. Kamala Harris made Donald Trump look like Joe Biden. Let me say it again. And I'm only talking about mannerisms. I'm talking about response times. I'm talking about answers in general. I know what the Republicans were saying when they said Joe Biden shouldn't have been on stage. Well, if it isn't Xavier, the executive chef Tillman, well, great to see you on the show tonight. But I want you to understand what I saw was exactly what the Republicans had said about Joe Biden, and they were right. Okay? Let me be fair. Republicans were right when they said Joe Biden had moved past the season of his response time and his thought process being good enough to hold the office. And I saw the same thing last night with Donald Trump. He looked old. His answer, listen, I'm going to say this. And I'm saying this on behalf of immigrants who come into this country. I do not believe that Donald Trump was sitting around talking about people coming across the border to eat your pet. Listen, we got to stop the foolery somewhere. We can agree that we don't all have the same philosophies. That is true. But if you have a candidate, whoever it is, and that candidate is talking about fictitious things, or that person is disconnected from reality, or that person can't manage themselves through a process, I believe it is incumbent. Now, I don't believe there's enough time for this, but Donald Trump should have walked off the stage last night, and he should have said to the Republican Party, I'm incapable of being your candidate. Put somebody else that's qualified up there. I'm just saying. Lady Elegant said, in my friend Sanford voice, the VP made Trump look like a big dummy. Now, let me say this. I'm not going to go in that far. I'm going to say what we witnessed last night was something that America must understand in the way we go about our presidential selection process, and even greater, some of our congressmen and senators, because this isn't the first time we've seen this activity. We have seen senators, congressmen that have been around for many, many years and have done honorable service for the country stay at the party too long. And you can't just be selecting a person because they have the same ideology as you, but they're not in touch with total reality. And so, again, what I saw last night was two people walk out on the stage that I personally was not convinced by either before the debate that either of them were quality candidates. But last night I put my thinking cap on and I was only going off what was before me, asking myself the tough questions. Who of the two is qualified? And let me judge the qualifications based on the answers, based on the optics, based on the response time. We're talking about fundamental readiness regardless of political party. And I believe throughout the entire night on last night, and that doesn't mean that if there's another debate that we won't see a different version, but the same thing you all said about Joe Biden, I fundamentally believe last night Donald Trump looked his age. Let me see what is Xavier. She was well rehearsed, or else you would have gotten a word salad. Okay, well, look here, Executive Chef Tillman. Let me say this to you. I don't care if what you say is she was well rehearsed or well prepared. It is not her fault that Donald Trump wasn't. It is not her fault that Donald Trump looked his age. And we've got to accept and respect that there comes a point when we should not be allowing 75 and 80-year-olds to run for the highest office of the land because of what it takes to physically and mentally be in that role. Now, I don't want all of my senior citizen and well-seasoned individuals Big Rod said, Father Time is undefeated. I don't want y'all getting your older pitchforks out and coming and saying that I have a problem with senior people. No, that is not the case. My mama is a senior above 80, and she makes me laugh every day, and I believe I would commit the ultimate crime on behalf of my mama. But I would not want my mama running the White House, because I can tell you on some days we would have great things occurring, and on some days she'll push the red button just because it was red. And I'm just saying. So you've got to accept, just like I had to accept, that what I saw between the two candidates last night, irrespective of ideology, irrespective of political party, there was one person on that stage last night that looked from the optics and the answers and the response time like they deserve to be in the office. Not saying that that person has always or will have always made decisions that are in line with my personal views. Corey Parks, what's going on, my brother? Glad to see you on the show. But we've got to hit reality. And I'm saying this to my Republican comrades. I want you to have the same noble mindset that you had with Joe Biden when he couldn't remember where he was at on the stage and started talking crazy. You called it out. I want you to do the same thing about Donald Trump. There are some good folks on the Republican Party who are qualified to run for office. Donald Trump cannot be your best option just in terms of, is he physically and mentally sound and ready to be in that office? The answer from what we saw last night is a resounding no. And I don't think that there is anyone who can dispute that just on those optics and those answers and those response times and the fact that he could get set off that fast. Now, to my Democratic colleagues, as an independent, I don't want you to get too comfortable either, because a leopard doesn't change their spots. Of the two candidates left running around, Kamala appeared to be the most prepared, the most ready in the moment. But don't forget, Kamala's a little iffy too. Nikki talking about elect the clown, get a circus. Nikki Carter, you know what? I'm not going to get into name calling, because I believe that there are things that sometimes people on the Democratic side don't give Donald Trump credit for. Just like there are people on the Republican side that no matter what positive things happen on the Democratic side, they're not going to give you all credit. I think if we step away from the rhetoric and we're just talking about readiness and the ability to make sound decisions and the ability to respond to situations in the moment, you should not be searching for a presidential candidate where the entire cabinet is going to have to keep an eye on him or her because they might be drinking Pepsis and eating cheeseburgers at 2 a.m. and acting an absolute fool and trying to bargain away something. This is a time for people to be dealing with the known, not the unknown. And we should also not be dealing with somebody. Is this dude, what is James talking about? Kamala, not Kamala. Listen, James, first of all, I don't care what she calls herself. I don't know. I've heard it called a million different ways. So miss me with that. I don't care what you call it. You call it what you want to call it. I don't even plan to call her that often. Again, just want you to know that. Anyway, that is not the topic for the night. I just thought it was incumbent upon us to bring that up and to state the obvious, because we gave attention to it when it was with Joe Biden. I believed it was incumbent for us to address it so that those who are having the pitchforks and the haterisms, they could not say that I did not address the elephant in the room. But Republicans, y'all do got to admit, if your candidate is talking about people coming across the border to eat folks' pets, come on now, we don't went too far. I'm just saying. So it seems like it's a lot of people that is trying to teach me how to pronounce her name. Y'all wasn't saying that when Donald Trump was calling or whatever. Leave me alone, people. Let's get on the topic for the night. The topic of the night is, as you saw from the beginning, it is right, but not righteous in situations. And this is directed toward the Tyreek Hill versus the police. Now, before I begin, I have to make a disclaimer. Those of you, before I start, those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Tyreek Hill plays for the Miami Dolphins. He is, by all accounts, a NFL star. He was on his way to the game the other day, and around 10-something in the morning, he was driving fast, and 2 bike cops pulled him over. And what occurred through that process has impacted many from different spectrums. So I am going to discuss this tonight, but I want to give a disclaimer, if you will, at the beginning. First and foremost, tonight we're going to discuss some things that have multicultural, race, and perceived bias, and we must be sensitive to this. And as a disclaimer for myself and my personal view, because the show is going to address things associated with stereotypes and law enforcement, I believe that it is only fair for me to state my perspective. Law enforcement, police officers, correction officers, these individuals, first and foremost, it is a noble profession, meaning it takes a special individual to go into law enforcement. Law enforcement, much like a doctor or someone who is dealing with critical issues every day that a law enforcement professional goes to work, there is a 50-50 chance they might not return home or may not return home as they left. Law enforcement personnel, men and women, make extreme sacrifices daily. And often, even within their own communities, they are viewed with a level of distrust and disdain because of a few. If you grew up in the white community, law enforcement may have been somewhat better to you than in the Negro community. The perceptions may be different, or the Latino community, or even the Asian community. But in recent years, we've seen the video evidence that a few, in comparison to the masses, have put a sore thumb on people's perspective of a noble profession. I happen to have an excellent relationship with law enforcement. I can tell you from a personal perspective. In my local town, there is a sheriff. The sheriff's name is Jack Smith. He is an excellent sheriff, reaches out to the community. The officers that serve under him, by overwhelming majority, are excellent officers from within the community or surrounding areas They have programs for the elderly where they will call them and make sure that they are all right. I've seen law enforcement officers bring boxes of food to elderly people's houses. I've seen them give people opportunities. I need y'all to know this before we get into tonight's information. One of my classmates, excellent guy outside of law enforcement, Eddie Buffalo, operates at the highest level for our state, has been in the ranks, saw him not long ago. If you look at his body of work, it has been done with honor, with respect, with dignity. And those that work for him and with him understand it, and they're known to carry themselves in the same manner. He's the type of gentleman that if you see him on the street, he doesn't think about what his title is. He'll shake your hand, give you a hug, find out if you need anything. Eddie Buffalo is that type of leader in law enforcement, public safety. And I could go on and on and on because there are hundreds that I am familiar with, either professionally or personally, who are just outstanding. I've got neighbors that work in correction, and they get up every day and they go down there to these prisons and going through, if you've never done it before, let me tell you, I have taught in prisons, and I've gone through the gates. And I've gone through the process of when you get there, they're checking to make sure that you don't have any contraband on you. And you walk through one gate, and you walk through another gate, and you walk through another gate, and you're going through barracks to get to the backside of the prison where there's a teaching area at. And you go in a room, and you have approximately 10 people in your room to teach, whatever your subject matter. For me, it was business and computer classes. But I say this because every man and woman that works in corrections is going to jail every day. And I want you to understand the high level of stress that's involved in these professions, because overwhelmingly in corrections, they are undermanned, understaffed, and they are in a secured environment with some individuals, not all, that don't have hope or anything. And overwhelmingly, they do the best job possible. Now, that's my disclaimer. But we're going to talk about the situation with Tyreek Hill and what I have been able to watch probably 9 different video angles and clips and listen to responses. And I'm going to give you all my perspective because someone asked me for it. So let me, for those of you who are not aware of the situation, when the 2 police who had their body cams, which I don't even know why they had their body cams going. If somebody's in law enforcement up here, let me know if the cameras stay on all the time, because the initial video that I saw from the view of the 2 motorcycle police officers, they appeared to be sitting, as many do, checking the traffic, checking for speeders, and you can see the vehicles come past. And at a certain point, you see what appears to be a black McLaren or a Ferrari. I can tell you, if you don't know what they are high-speed, attractive vehicles. If you see one of them, you know it's somebody in there that that either has a position that pays them well, or they borrowed somebody's car, or they stole somebody's car. Because you ain't just riding around in a McLaren unless you inherited, unless you got an excellent career, unless you had a little money stashed away, unless you built one by accident. The average person, I'm probably not going to have one. All right. Nikki Carter said they turned them on during any interaction. But Nikki Carter, here's the thing. The reason why I asked that question is because Big Rod said, I believe the camera automatically come on when the sirens are activated. Okay, that could be the case. Nikki Carter, the reason why I asked that question, because their cameras was on before the McLaren even came into view. They were parked on the side of the or in the lane wherever they were at. Anyway, nonetheless. So Tyreek speeds by, and I'm saying speeds because from my view, the speed the other cars was going on, you could clearly tell he was exceeding that greatly. So they get themselves together, and as Big Rod said, maybe they turned on the sirens or whatever, but they get behind him. And as soon as they get behind Tyreek, Mr. Hill, if you will, he notices and he pulls to the side. And the officer, I believe, had signaled for him to go down a little bit further, I'm thinking to get to a safer area, but still on the street, to which he did. The officer gets off his bike, walks up to the window, and taps on the window. Immediately when he taps on the window, Tyreek Hill can be heard saying, don't knock on my window like that. And so at some point he rolls down the window, and he's still conveying to the officer, don't knock on my window like that. The officer, I believe, asked him for his driver's license, to which he complied, but still talking about don't knock on my window. The officer begins to turn around to walk away. Tyreek rolls his window back up. The officer stops going to what I perceived was to check out the driver's license to make sure that there was no warrants or anything like that, and potentially to give him a ticket or a warning. Who knows? We don't know. But he stops heading to do his job, comes back, knocks on the window again as he's telling Tyreek Hill, roll the window down, don't roll it back up. They're having some verbal joust about the window, to which at some point, now mind you, remember, it's not just one officer, it's actually two officers, and at some point it'll wind up being 8, 9 officers. But at this point, the confrontation now isn't about the speeding or the driver's license, because he's in possession of them. It's him telling him, don't roll that window back up. Now, as the gentleman said to me today, Tyreek shouldn't have rolled his window back up. Well, as I reviewed the law, he's not under any obligation once he follows the command of turning over his driver's license. He's not under any requirement during the process of the guy going to check his driver's license. He's not under any legal obligation to have the window down. Sandra Key, our legal beagle, says in Florida, the law states officers are required to keep their body camera on during law enforcement related encounters and activities. Thank you, legal beagle. That's our legal beagle, our little law professional, if you will. And so, while I believe that Mr. Hill and his demeanor was the initial cause of the discontent, and I'm not talking about because he was speeding. I'm talking about, yes, the attitude to me left a lot to be desired. Let me say that first and foremost. I don't believe that when you come in contact with law enforcement, you got to have that type of attitude. Clearly, you knew you were speeding. So don't you act agitated when law enforcement pulls you over, because you was violating the law. But I digress. Let's keep moving. So this confrontation, at some point, the officer said, you're going to get up out the car. And the door opens, and I guess Tyreek's not moving fast enough. So the officer reaches in, grabs him by the arm, puts another arm around the neck, and begins to pull him out the vehicle, to which they ultimately wind up with him on the ground, hands behind him, knee to the back, putting cuffs on him. All right. In this process, other Miami Dolphins teammates, because remember, they're on their way to the game, because they're all flowing in the same direction, they pull over. And some people would say they shouldn't have pulled over. We exist in a country where two things are true. In the minority community, we've seen enough situations where, because there are people standing around unwilling to stop, unwilling to do anything, that situations can go wrong. So I don't have a problem with his homeboys, with his brothers in arms pulling over, as long as they're not directly interfering. I believe they should pull over. And I believe if you see something that you think is untoward, if you will, that going into observation mode is nothing wrong with it. It's not against the law. Now you've got people. There was one of our Caucasian brothers who actually stopped his car and began filming. And you could hear him saying, now that's unnecessary. Now, mind you, our Caucasian brother could not have heard what we later heard on the body cam. But there was one part that was true. When someone gives you an unlawful order, the law says you're not under any obligation to uphold an unlawful order. And now, if, for those of you who don't understand, if Tyreek Hill had refused to roll down the window and refused to provide his identity to the law enforcement officers, the police, if you will, he would have been out of compliance with the law. But at the point when this thing accelerated, and again, it accelerated because of the energy that Tyreek Hill began with, not just the speeding. I don't believe the speeding was the reason why the officer was in his feelings. The officer was in his feelings because he didn't like the fact that when he approached the vehicle and tapped on the window, that Tyreek went into this diatribe about don't knock on my window no more and said it about 10 times. So then Tyreek rolls down the window, gives him his driver's license, and the professional law enforcement officer who is on his job, instead of going to do his job, he's now in the midst of the emotion. So instead of going to run the license and see if there's any warrants or see if there's any reason to detain or writing him the ticket or writing him the warrant, he doubles back, turns around. Now we're talking about roll the window down. Now we're going to get into who got the biggest pair because you don't put the window up and I told you to put it down. And so now I'm going to get you out the vehicle. Now, one of my colleagues said to me today, he said, well, Sinclair, how would you have felt? I can understand the officer being a little nervous because the guy had tinted windows and he don't know what he could have done. You know, he could have went, got the information, came back, he rolled down the window and pulled a gun on him and shot him. And that is a possibility. But I said to him this: you can't give an unlawful order because you are nervous about your job. You are the professional who is on the job. First and foremost, you've already retrieved what you need to run the identification. And if the window was down and Tyreek had a gun, which he did not, but if he had one and the intent to shoot, you walking there and getting the information would not have stopped him from having a greater access to you with the gun when you came back. This individual was not scared that Tyreek Hill had a weapon because he never drew his. He had backup. Fast forwarded. Get him on the ground. And now you got extra people out there. You got extra teammates. You got bystanders who now realize this is Tyreek Hill, who we need to be on the field in a couple of hours to play this game. And he's on the ground with a knee in his back. And now he's sitting up and there's this argument. And now the original officer is excited because, hold on. Our legal beagle said, in Florida, there is no specific legal requirement to keep your window fully down. It is a good idea to keep it down enough to maintain clear communication with the officer, keeping the window partially down so you can communicate clearly and see the hands of a person inside the vehicle. I agree with the legal beagle. That's exactly what I read when I researched Florida law. There is a requirement that you present when asked by an officer for your driver's license, because it is a requirement to have a driver's license operating a motor vehicle on the highways in the state of Florida. He had complied with that piece. Although he complied with a bad attitude, he still complied. And remember, the professional in this space is the officer. The officer is at work. Tyreek Hill, though he's an NFL player, he ain't even at the stadium yet. He is a civilian trying to get to work. The officer is at work. Tyreek has complied with his bad attitude. He's rolled the window up. It leads to you dragging him out the car. And let me say this to my law enforcement professionals who I've already said, 95% of them operate with a high level of dignity and humility and professionalism. Here's how you could tell that there was something going on in the ego of the officer. Not all of them, because clearly there was some around that was like, bro, you done got me in the middle of this foolishness. There came a point where one of the NFL players was like, hey, man, I'm just trying to make sure my guy is good. And he kept saying, get back. And the guy started walking back. Well, he said, get back further. And the guy said, well, how far you want me to go back? Get in your car and get off the street. Now, mind you, if you look at the cars, they were in an area that you could literally pull over. Second of all, Florida law does not require that you cannot stand to the wayside and observe. You simply cannot become an interference. So telling you to leave the scene might have been a good idea. And I understand why he would do it, because now you got a bunch of people coming around and it might impact the safety of the other officers. But you also got to remember, you thought it was a good idea to drag the man out with all these cameras around and get him on the ground. I'm just saying. Tyreek's speeding and his bad attitude set some things in motion. But as the law enforcement professional who is on your job, you must be able to manage your emotions. At some point in the video, one of the other officers came over and said, hey, man, you know that's Tyreek Hill, right? The guy said, well, who is that? And all this is going on. So now you fast forward, Tyreek is telling his homeboy, call some guy who I'm assuming was his agent or a lawyer. And by the time I watch the next scene in these, I'm talking about it was lawyers. It was looked like might have been somebody from the team, because the playing field was probably a couple of blocks away at best. The police wind up putting the handcuffs on one of the other teammates. And what proceeds to happen is, as you watch the video, one of the officers who's coming up as they're having conversations about what took place and how it got, you would notice the officer who had become aggressive, we will call the lead officer, if you will, when they were saying something he did not want recorded, he would take his hand and he would put it over the audio piece and mute the conversation, and then he would remove his hand. Legal Beagle said, under Florida law, if you willfully refuse to comply with lawful orders from a police officer, it can be considered a second-degree misdemeanor, and that can lead to an arrest. Hey, mama, what's going on? Mama, you about late now. You probably in there napping and sleep. Now, notice what the Legal Beagle said. Our law professional has notified you, and the key phrase is a lawful order. She said, under Florida law, if you willfully refuse to comply with a lawful order. Chris Parks, what's going on, my brother? Just asked a good question. That's where I was about to go with y'all. What is considered to be a lawful order? The lawful order must be lawful, meaning you cannot, because you feel like it's in the best interest, just make up something and consider it to be lawful. That does not make it lawful. For example, when they told some of the dudes to step back some, one might say that there was a reasonable distance where police officers felt like it could be obstructing their ability to do their job. No problem with that. But the gentleman even asked the question, how far back do you want me to go, assuming so that the officer felt safe? The officer then gave the unlawful order, which was you got to get in your car and get up out of here. That wasn't lawful. And so the thing I'll say is the challenge with all of this is, and that's why the title of this was Right But Not Righteous. Tyreek Hill was, once the stop occurred, let me begin by saying, he was 100% wrong for speeding. That was a violation of the law. Once he was pulled over and stopped the vehicle, Tyreek Hill was under the legal obligation to present his driver's license, to which he did. He did it in a nasty attitude way. But the law doesn't say you gotta like getting the ticket. It doesn't say you have to address. Now, let me say this to all of you all. It has been my personal experience when I have gotten stopped in the past. I'm a yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am type of dude, because I don't even need no issue. Lady Elegance said he also didn't have his seatbelt on. Absolutely, Lady Elegance. The officer mentioned it to him. What's going on, S.C. Shepherd? There go my armor bearer. But understand something. Anymore, what's going on? Glad that you're right. Better late than never. But again, the lawfulness for the violations, which were speeding and not wearing a seatbelt, he was entitled to get a ticket for both of those. Legal Beagle said in Florida, it is lawful for the police officers to request bystanders to leave the area doing any police activity. Now, I will go back and review the section that I read implied that they could ask you to move as far back as they felt like was providing them safety to do their job. But either which way, Because on a public street, if you are not participating, meaning doing anything to interfere with law enforcement doing their jobs, and it is a public street, you have a right to be on the public street. You do not have the right to interfere in any manner. Now, let me say this. As a matter of principle, when you are stopped by the police, everybody wants to go home that night. You do, and the officer does. And there's this dance that is done so often when individuals believe that it is a good idea to become verbally combative with law enforcement. Now, I know what many of you are going to say. Many of you are going to say, I've watched videos where there have been one of our Caucasian brothers, and they have been able to say anything and everything, and they don't even get detained. That's right, because maybe the officer that was dealing with them had a high level of professionalism, and they knew that, look, I don't care what this clown is saying. I'm going to give him this ticket. They're going to have to pay it, or I'm going to detain them, or whatever I got to do. I need you all to process. Law enforcement professionals are people too. They are human beings just like us. And if I'm not going to let somebody at my job come at me a certain way, law enforcement is not under any obligation to put up with your verbal abuse either. But again, that little dance that exists when we say, okay, well, I'm going to show this person and I'm going to do X, Y, Z. Tyreek Hill wound up on the ground because Tyreek Hill did three things. First and foremost, he got stopped because he was speeding. Number two, the initial energy, he brought that negative energy. Number three was that the police officer could not stay in the professional energy, took his eye off the prize of just giving this man a ticket or arresting him if he had warrants. He got into the verbal back and forth negative energy because he didn't like Tyreek Hill telling them, don't knock on my window like that. Truth be told, maybe some people don't like for you to touch their window. My thing is, if you'd have had your window down when the officer got there, he wouldn't have been able to knock on it. But that's neither here nor there. Once you're speeding, you knew he pulled you over, you probably should have just put your window down. But he wasn't under any legal obligation to keep it down the entire time. He was under legal obligation to comply. Not with a great attitude, but it would have helped the situation. But for him speeding and his bad attitude, he wouldn't have, I don't believe he would have wound up on the ground. And but for the officer and his arrogance and his ego, I don't think the situation escalates to the point that it does. Because I've got people who come to our business establishment every day. And not every customer that comes to the business is going to be in a great mood. Some of them are going to come there and they're going to have had a bad day, a bad night, a bad morning. And you might say, how can I help you? They might say something. You might say, well, I didn't quite hear you. They might say, well, you can't hear. What's wrong with your hearing? While the customer should have a better attitude, they're not under legal obligation to have a smile or a good attitude. It's just a best practice. But if you are the person who is working, you're under a obligation to have a certain amount of professionalism about the way you go about your business. That wasn't what was occurring. One bad person, well, not bad person. Let's rewind it. One person with a bad attitude ignited another person with a bad attitude that wound up with a situation where the officer has been put on desk duty, whatever. And now, once again, this has become a problem for law enforcement as a whole, one of the most noble professions there is. And we have people on both sides of the fence, both sides of the racial divide, both sides of the multicultural divide, who have high energy and high opinion about the incident where two men were wrong. If you are a Tyreek Hill fan and you're an anti-law enforcement, you cannot honestly say that this situation was not ignited but for the actions and thus the attitude of Tyreek Hill. It doesn't matter to me if he had a right to act the fool. He shouldn't have. Because just like the officer didn't know what kind of day Tyreek Hill had or was going to have on his at the game, the Tyreek, you didn't know what kind of day the officer had. Treating each other like human beings, having a level of respect toward each other, that's free. Tyreek 9 times out of 10 was going to get a ticket. He might have even got a warning, but for his bad attitude. And if the goal is, let's make it home today, all parties, then don't we have to begin with honor, respect, and dignity toward each other as human beings? Because if you're out here with this energy, and again, I don't want everybody to assume that everybody in law enforcement walks around with that energy. There are some that do, but the overwhelming majority of law enforcement professionals are just going to work to do a noble job every day. But you better remember that there is some. Was that him in that video? I don't know what video you're referring to. But you better understand that sometimes you got to put your pride in your pocket and address something in a different form than in the midst of the energy that was what it was. Because it didn't benefit Tyreek Hill to be in handcuffs on the sidewalk. Now, let me get y'all to the end since it's almost time to go. He did not wind up going to jail. Cooler heads prevailed. I believe he got a ticket, probably one or two. And the cuffs were removed. And Tyreek Hill went to the game. And he scored a touchdown. I think he had a good game. Now, let me tell you what else he did. And this goes to show you how petty people can be. Tyreek Hill scored a touchdown, went to the end zone, put his hands behind his back like he was being detained, and one of his teammates came and walked behind him like he was a police officer. Pettiness, people. You ain't had to do that. Because you're going to see them same officers out there on that street. Come on now. Let's do a little better. Let's be better toward each other as human beings. Because there comes a point when you willfully push and poke and prod people. You're going to get what you get. And that is not gender-based. And that is not racially based. That's human being based. And there are people on both sides of the track who have had bad days and some who have bad attitudes. And when two individuals, both who have some portion of being right and both who have some portion of being wrong, but they both have bad attitudes, you wind up in situations when people are right, but not righteous in their actions and conduct. Many men said, disrespect will not be permitted or tolerated during a police stop, search, or request for information. Hill is able to pay any ticket, so I don't get the attitude. And that's the situation, many memes, you're right. Mr. Hill had an attitude because he wanted to have one. He knew he was right. He knew he had the means to pay for the ticket or get a lawyer to fight the ticket. But the attitude is the igniter of this situation. And sometimes you can be right legally, but not righteous in your actions. And you can impact a community to which some will follow your actions and it will not turn out because they are not Tyreek Hill. There's not going to be agents and lawyers and your homies pulling over. So if you have an interaction with the men and women in law enforcement, even if you feel like that it is a unrighteous stop, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And unless they are asking you to do something that is morally or illegal in general, simply comply and take it up with the courthouse. That's it, people. I got to go.
It's about that time, baby. Oh, yeah. Here we go.